Welcome back, Michael.
Hello, David.
Michael, I'm a little surprised to see you reviewing another Thomas Friedman book. If I recall correctly, you weren't too crazy about the last one.
You remember well. Yes, the book before this one, it was called The World is Flat, and I found it to be a restatement of the obvious. But this time, he's added hot and crowded to flat, and it's a much better book.
Explain that for us.
Well, the world is flat. That means that we're all interconnected. You know, with the opening up of economies and the internet, of course, we can all communicate, collaborate, and compete. That was the restatement of the obvious in the last book. But this time, adding crowded and hot means it's all about global warming. You know, its causes and what we have to do about it. Now, is it all original? Is this all stuff that you've never read before? Well, no. I mean, if you read the New York Times from cover to cover every day, you've read this, but not everyone does that. Tom Friedman does that because he writes in the New York Times. But what he's done in this book is he's linked the cause and effect in a very comprehensive and convincing way about what I guess is, you know, the most serious problem the planet faces and possible ways out of what we've created.
Hot, flat, and crowded. Let's start with crowded. Talk to us about what he goes into in the book about crowded.
Yeah, well, crowded's the big one. You know, when you and I were born, David, there were about 3 billion people on the planet. Today, there are about 6 billion people on the planet. And, you know, before we check out, if we go the distance, there'll probably be 9 billion people on the planet. You know, that's 3 times the number of people in exactly the same space. Now, in one lifetime, a triple. Now, that's clearly not sustainable. And Friedman talks as well about the golden billion. That's, you know, Americans and people who live like Americans. There are 1 billion of them. There are 2 billion more who are trying to live like Americans. There's another 3 billion coming on behind, and then 3 billion more coming, you know, in the next several decades. And the level of consumption to achieve these lifestyles is terrifying. You know, the level of carbon in the atmosphere, that's immeasurable. That's a very objective piece of information. Well, it's gone way up since before the Industrial Revolution, almost doubled, and it's knocking the climate haywire. That's the hot.
He accepts global warming is for real then?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's an understatement. And he presents the evidence that it's real in a very convincing way.
Well, if we accept that it's for real, what's next?
Well, oil. You've got to start with oil and coal. I mean, we all know that we're producing CO2 every time we burn this stuff, but Friedman also plays the political side of this, pointing out that very, very convincingly that when we buy oil, we're pouring trillions of dollars into what he calls the petro-dictatorships. Now, you know who they are. It's a long chapter, and it's a great chapter. You know, he shows that this isn't only bad for us, it's bad for the planet and bad for peace in the world. You know, read this chapter for sure. This is the stuff that he writes in the New York Times as the foreign affairs columnist, and this is his strength.
Michael, this sounds like a good read for vacation, but is there any business value in this book?
Well, The World is Flat was a runaway bestseller because business people bought the book. Yes, there's lots of insight in it, and there are lots of quotes from senior business people. I think the people who bought The World is Flat will also buy a Hot, Flat, and Crowded and enjoy it even more.
So let's talk about solutions. You can't write a book like this without offering up some answers. So what does he come up with?
Correct. Well, his answer is something I mean, they're plural, you know, there's no one answer, but I guess the basis of it is something that he calls the energy internet. Now, it's all about electricity. He calls them clean electrons. It's not oil. What he talks about in here is clean energy systems that send out clean electrons into our homes and factories and cars, generated not by oil or coal, but by wind and solar and nuclear and he also wants a system that's far more efficient, so we're using fewer of those clean electrons. Now, I'm oversimplifying what's here greatly, but what he describes is very, very convincing.
He's not suggesting another Manhattan Project, though, right?
Well, no, specifically, he says here, 12 guys and gals going off to Los Alamos won't solve the problem. He says, we need 100,000 people in 100,000 garages trying 100,000 things in the hope that 5 of them will break through.
Wow. So verdict, Michael, thumbs up or thumbs down?
Well, David, I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up, but I want to say something first. You know, Friedman's a journalist. I'm a journalist. Journalists need editors, and Friedman really needs an editor. This guy must write 20,000 words a day. This is 400-plus pages of tiny print. There is a 220-page book trying to get out of here. And he's way too focused on the U.S. I mean, for a guy who travels the world the way he does, he doesn't seem to realize that in this whole area, that, you know, Europe is miles ahead. But, you know, he's running for a North American audience. I think it's a book that North Americans will learn from and they will enjoy reading. It's an important book, and I give it 2 thumbs up.
Very good, Michael. As always, thanks very much.
Enjoy talking with you, David.